Hello and welcome to episode 12 of the LCLC podcast. In this episode, I talk with Ryan Engley, assistant professor of media studies at Pamona College, and one half, the other half being Todd McGowan, of the team behind the very popular Why Theory podcast. Together, Ryan and I review the nuts and bolts of how to begin conferencing. Everything from how to draft the initial submission documents to advice on how to navigate the various social functions that typically occur during and after the conference. Due to the long and wide-ranging nature of our conversation, I need to make some cuts, and I'd like to provide a little bit of context as a result. First, you will hear Ryan speaking of the hermeneutics of suspicion. It's a well-known term, now used as a kind of shorthand to identify when we see theory operating in a mode we call critique, of revealing how the object of study and the mode of study itself is all implicated in aspects of our ruling ideology. Ryan and I then try to argue that good conference going goes beyond the hermeneutics of suspicion into something we start to call the hermeneutics of discovery. And finally, you will hear Ryan allude to an excised exchange where he spoke of his good fortune of meeting his colleague at Pamona, Jennifer Friedlander, at a conference prior to his securing the job. It's an example of some of the surprising rewards that can indeed come from active conference going. So with those preliminaries out of the way, let's dive right in. I think you will agree that this is a very useful and informative episode of the LCLC podcast.
Conferences are hard. I want to almost say even uniquely hard in this because you can go to, they don't even have to be very specifically tailored conferences, but you can go to a conference and it feels like you are going to a summer camp where everybody already knows each other, and you're the odd person out. I mean, even I was talking to a friend of mine who went to NEMLA, the Northeastern MLA conference for the first time, and he went to a couple different panels on he's a history PhD. And he lived in Germany for a while. He studies German, like history and culture and literature. And it was a talk on a German author. I'm forgetting who it was. And he was like really excited. There were two panels on it. And he went and he felt like it was four people hanging out, and with people in the audience who were also it was very, very cliquey and very gatekeepy. So this is the thing about conferences sometimes that I think is quite hard, is that the knowledge seems kind of like gate kept. Like if you look at that, for one, how do you find out about conferences? There's that UPenn list. And that's, right. And it is the grossest web page in terms of like there's no. It's just links. It's just blue hyperlinks and text, and it's a little. I don't know. Like it's not intentional because it's just been like that way since it feels like Internet 1.0. But it's almost like a little intimidating. Like if you don't know how to use it and how to look at it, then it's off-putting. And it's for this reason actually. A couple of former URI students who I had the pleasure of knowing briefly, Mike Becker and Derek IM, I think, were their names. They created this alternative. I don't know if have you ever seen this, cfplist.com, I think?
No.
It's really you could put it in the notes for this. I'll send you the link. It's it takes from the UPenn list, but it visualizes it so you can see where the conferences are, like on a map, like on a global map. And even just that is helpful to like, if you have no idea where you want to conference or how to conference, maybe one of the things that to do is just to think like, well, what's in my backyard? What's coming near me? How far do I have to go? And that was sort of their idea, is to make something a little bit more approachable, a little bit more user friendly. So that, like, in the world of how to begin, how do you even find this stuff? How do you even find that there are academic conferences and panels? And I think the UPenn list is, of course, that's the big resource, but all the things are mixed in also with like calls for chapters and submissions to edited collections and things like that. Like that's all kind of mixed in. And then, as I said, two folks that I knew from University of Rhode Island started this thing that I think it got it's managed by other people now, or like a educational company or something like that, but it's still a very, very good resource, so you can see where conferences are happening, what the lists are, what people are looking for panels, and so that, as just a very, very basic thing, I think is like a step you have to go beyond. So that's the first thing. I don't know if you want to respond to that before we get to the next part, which is what's an appropriate panel or conference for you, which I think is a very, very big question.
I appreciate learning about that additional resource beyond the Penn call for papers. I am a little astounded, really, that the Penn call for papers still seems to be the apex predator of
It's crazy.
the game,
isn't it? It's crazy. It's like I don't know in what other industry could something that, like, I don't know. I don't want to say. I mean, I don't know who manages it, so I'm not trying to slag anybody off. Like, there are probably very good structural reasons why that site can't look any different than the way that it is. I don't know what it is, but it has the unintended consequence where I think for new people in the field, like it's just like you have to teach yourself how to read it, because it doesn't look like anything else that you come across on the internet. The closest thing is Reddit, but even Reddit looks, there's pictures, and it looks different
right?
now. Yeah.
Right. It's one step up from a shelf mark,
Yeah.
in terms of making sense. If you've used as a Shakespearean here, if you've used rare book facilities, very often you're still dealing with shelf marks and things like that. And the Penn CFP is not that far behind. And you're right that navigating it is a challenge, and certainly people new to this intellectual environment would do well to basically click through the whole thing, really,
I
and get
agree.
a sense. Yeah,
I agree. It's also, and this would be, I think something this is good about the Penn website, is that it does, on the left hand panel, it is listed by like sort of broad topics. So you have like film, media studies, romance languages, like all these different things, and you click on it, and I think it's, if you already have a sense, so of like, I would say if you're a senior in undergrad and then in graduate school, you probably start to have a sense about what your area is and what you're specializing in, at least broadly, I would say. Like, if you're younger in those trajectories, it's really good to just look through on the website in your area. It gives you a sense of like what people are talking about. Like, actually, like this morning, I saw something I'd never seen before in media studies, that I guess there was a book in 2020 that decided to take television commercials seriously, which is something that I also am trying to do in a manuscript, and I didn't know about this book, so I was really, really happy to learn about it. I don't know this person, so let's just give a plug for no reason. Consuming Images, Film Art, and the American Television Commercial is the book, and then I think it maybe has a different title. I saw like the international, or maybe this was the panel. It was like the international television commercial. Anyway, I think commercials are really interesting. It's in my field. They're often not taken seriously for a lot of different reasons, because it is like purely capitalistic, and a lot of there's a lot of work in just as a brief aside, a lot of work in television studies to like try to separate the narrative content of TV from the commercial packaging, because there's this idea that it hurts it as looking at it as an artistic endeavor. And I'm happy to see that there are people who are sort of pushing back against it, that there is something that happens in the commercial that is worth taking seriously, and not just from the perspective of manipulation. My take on it, just very briefly in a sentence, I think that television commercials do world building better than most TV shows. So like, you probably like, I don't want to have this conversation exactly right now, but I bet you can think of 5 Geico commercials right now with like different gimmicks, and that is there's something constitutive of the idea of world building there. So which is something that TV does as a narrative form anyway. So I just looked through that this morning and I saw this scholar and the people taking seriously something that like I hadn't seen that much recent energy toward. So that's a good so that's a good thing about that list, is that it does collate all of those different things, so you can see what people are doing like outside of maybe the top journals in the field, you know. So like what are people into? So I think that's a very good way to use the UPenn site and even the CFP list as well, beyond just finding a conference for yourself. So I think like what are the questions people are asking? What are the themes that folks seem to be interested in? And that is a good way not just to position your own research as a graduate student, but also to like just to think like, do you have something that speaks to what the field is into right now? And this is a pretty big. Conferences like are fun, especially now, because like it is after, you know, in with lockdown, the pandemic, and like Zoom conferencing, and like so much academic work can feel like you are just I don't know, shouting into a void. You don't know who else is there, who else is thinking these things with you. And so conferences can be like really, I think, affirming in that way. Like you get into like a, you know, a 4-day intellectual atmosphere like in your head, and like that's like so super valuable. But on the other side, you have to be smart about how you use your time. And so I'm an evangelist for the idea that you shouldn't do a conference or a panel that is too divorced from what your project is. It has to be related in some way, or else you're giving your time away, and it'll hurt somewhere. Like, because it's again, as I said, the person who I knew had admitted that they had done conferencing to the point that it extended their like stay in graduate school for like maybe a year, maybe 2. And if you're funded, that's fine. If you're not funded, or you have to like scrap for funding, that's less fine. I mean, it's not good money anyway. But yeah, so there's a lot of different things. So I think to sum up last couple minutes, really important to use these CFP lists to get a sense of what your field is doing. What are the conversations people are having? What are the dominant ideas? What are some of the fringe ideas? Where are you positioned within that? And then you know, to try to do things that are like, in a very basic sense, if you've already written a seminar paper on something, that's probably a good idea to adapt that. If that has something to do with your larger project, pretty good idea to adapt that to a conference. It's a different genre, which we're going to get on to talk about, I know. But those things are important to sort of keep in line, is to make sure that you're building a story of yourself, I would say. Like everything has to fit in when you go on the job market. One of the questions you get asked is like how do your publications, your teaching, your conferences, your different things, like how do they fit as like a program? And it's a lot of pressure to put on yourself as a young scholar, but like just to have an eye toward that, like to like what is the development of your trajectory that makes the narrative of you as a scholar, and things should fit. It shouldn't be I don't know, I'm trying to think of, again, if you're a Shakespeare scholar, but like me, I also love sports, and then if I did like a kinesiology like conference, like that doesn't really fit from going up for jobs for Shakespeare, but it's on my CV, and it's like it starts to look like someone is unfocused. And as I said, it's a gatekeepy and hard field to get into like professionally. So like being able to tell a coherent story of yourself like through your work is paramount.
Right. I think that's all good advice, and I would encourage people that are beginning to mull over the idea of submitting to my conference, the LCLC, that they can visit the LouisvilleConference.com and look at our 2022 program. You can go online, and I haven't taken it down, and get a sense of what the conversations are that are going on here at the LCLC. And if you see an opportunity to jump in, that's great. I often, when I am in the position of mentoring, mention that there are, generally speaking, there are two different ways one gets going in this academic business of when it comes to publishing. And that is, you're either looking to correct somebody, fill a gap in the conversation that you notice, like, hey, there's a hole here, I'm going to fill it, or you try to start a new conversation. And trying to start a new conversation, particularly at the level of publishing, is usually the kind of advice that somebody will say, that's your second book after, or your third book, that's after you get tenure. Only then do you try to go out and go, excuse me, but I think we should all gather around over here and talk about what I want to talk about, which nobody else is really doing right now. That generally hooking your conversation to a pre-existing conversation is the best way to break into the field. But that if you see, but the stakes are lower in the conferencing game. And I am, as the ideal reader here for you, I do practice blind submission, and that's something that we should talk about.
Sure.
But I am receptive to new voices wanting to start a conversation, particularly if in your right, there are two parts to it. You have your abstract, and then you have your cover letter to it. If you say, I noticed that there's all this there's these conversations going on at your conference, but nobody's talking about this. You should, and I'd like to. And actually, I got some people here who are going to be doing it with me. Then, that's the kind of thing that makes my day.
That's awesome. And I think you are an ideal reader for that. And you're right in the publishing sense. It can often work in this sort of Hegelian way, where the best thing about the thing you're doing is the worst thing about it, and the worst thing about it is the best thing about it. If you're trying to start a new conversation, that is the best thing about it, but it's also the worst thing, because it's like, to a publisher, like, I don't know what the market is, like, I don't know how people are going to receive. It's all this unknowns that work against you. But I think those things, that aspect is muted pretty much in a conference setting, because so I think so conferences in general are really good sites for the new ideas, for the new takes, as well as for the corrections and the scholarly gap proposals, which there's of course overlap with the new idea between those two other genres, but I think that's awesome, and it is good. Like, so now so I think we could park the first part of this conversation to be about conferencing in general. And I think definitely the move to, like, what you're trying to accomplish at the Louisville conference, what you're trying to accomplish at the Louisville conference specifically, is where we should now turn for the next conference, which would be the third week of February, right? 2023. Yep. What if you had a blue sky scenario? What do you want to blue sky scenario? What do you want to see that you maybe haven't seen in the last couple of years?
Well, what I'd like to see is more either what I call the applied theory in our correspondence, or ideally really what I call pure theory. And that when I got to the University of Louisville in 1998, and so I'm a product of the Duke University graduate program, the English program. There's a literature program as well, and
you two fight, right? There's like they do basketball games, but just within those two. Anyway, yes.
The side story there, at least as I got it from Stanley Fish, who was my dissertation advisor, is that we talked about it glancingly on the podcast that I did with him, is that he and Frederick Jameson made the decision to come together, and that Fred became, his bailiwick became the literature program, Fred being a actual professor of French literature. People, if you had the privilege of being a student of Fred's, right, with a dissertation on Sartre, and so, sooner or later, you're going to, the all roads for Fred lead through Sartre. At some point, you're coming back to Sartre. And, and so people, so it's the right fit for him to take on the literature program, and it was the right fit for Fish to take on the English program. And people may not, this is one thing that I'd say to our younger, my ideal listeners out there, is that there were moments when this profession was in an expansion phase, and you can say that will never happen again. And that may be the case. It may never happen again, but don't tell me it never happened, because it did, and I experienced it. Duke University realized that they could ride to the top of U.S. News and World Reports and become the Harvard of the South, largely through stealing people like Fish and Jameson and becoming a renowned institution in the humanities. And so this essentially allowed Duke University, in other words, Jameson and Fish worked together to, in effect, double the size of people doing the kind of work we're talking about in the mid 80s. And there was a sense of that phase maybe coming to the end by the mid 90s, and certainly the sort of dot-com bomb of the turn of the millennium marks a certain sort of end of that expansionist phase, where, your field of media studies, and where media studies is really coming of age and is symbiotically joined at the hip in Madman style, really, with being the argot of Madison Avenue and Saatchi, and, it's being taken really seriously as you got to know this stuff. You have to be able to talk intelligently about deconstruction to get that Coca-Cola account. And, people don't remember this, but I do. I was, I watched, I read those kinds of magazines at the time. It was weird. It was a weird time, but there was that time. And
I'll just interject to say, like, this is I should come back on to have this conversation, but I think that it's interesting you brought these two things up. Part of the rise in media studies, I think, is we're getting students who in an earlier era would have done English or literature the way that Duke defines it, and that is I mean, here, because of the proximity to Hollywood, we got a lot of people who want to work in Hollywood, like industry stuff, but our program is, well, sorry, it's not to get into the weeds, but it's a 5-college consortium thing here. When you go to any one of Pamona, Pitzer, Claremont McKenna, Harvey Mudd, or Scripps, so in each college has a different kind of twist on media studies. Ours is more theoretical here, but it is one of those things where, like, I have students in class who I know, I'm like, 10 years ago, or maybe, well, I mean, yeah, maybe 10 years ago you'd have done literature studies. Like, I know it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'd love to see more papers that seek to rekindle and push forward that earlier sort of spirit, really, of evangelizing to a certain degree about theory, its continued utility and relevance in our current moment. If the podcast is working and somebody out there is saying to themselves, you know what, I think I'm going to get that cover letter and that summary together and go ahead and submit. And remember, you can always say no, you can always say no.
You
Go
don't have
ahead
to.
and submit. You can always say no later. Go through at least the experience of putting together the cover letter and the submission and sending it out there. And you will be confronted with the need to produce those two documents and to figure out what goes in the letter and what goes in the summary, and that to work and how they're going to work together and how they're going to work to illustrate briefly. That's the key thing, because these are one-page documents here, if you're doing it right, that illustrates how your intervention is going to do what it is Ryan is talking about, which is, if we stick with your language, deploying the hermeneutics of suspicion effectively enough to question, so that we don't go into confirmation bias here, to not to arrive at the endpoint that you always saw, but to genuinely push the conversation into new ground that is genuinely new for you and for the conversation itself, for thought itself, ideally, if you're ambitious. And that is the point of the session. The point of the session is for people to get together and realize that on this topic, I think we're at this point in this conversation, where can we push on from here? And let's make February in 2023 at Louisville, for these people who really care about this conversation, an opportunity to see where we can push these hermeneutics to discover a little bit more on the rubric that we're exploring.
Matthew, I like that. In fact, I like that so much. Because it is hermeneutics of suspicion is a hermeneutics of discovery.
Right.
I think absolutely. I think 100%. So I think that, and I think that's the ideal. That's kind of the ideal conference paper. Now you can do it like, do you want, maybe you want to take on, like, really big issues, or you want to take on like smaller issues that are big in like a specific field. Like, either way, like, I think it's still hermeneutics of discovery is the way to approach it. Now for the brass tacks thing, if you've never written an abstract before, you want 300 to 500 words. That's like,
right.
that is standard stuff. You want to do, in fact, can I give like a four, like, actually I want to
Please do.
I'm going to give you like a 4-sentence model. Okay.
Do it.
To start with. First sentence has to, in some way, it has to name the field of or discipline. If you're let's go through those 3 different models you laid out earlier: the correction paper, the gap paper, or the new direction paper. So right. if this is the kind of the methodology that you're going to be employing, that first sentence has to mention the person that you're correcting, the field in which there is a gap, or the last thing, the field which there's some sort of dominant belief that you wish to step away and push away from. Got to be in the first sentence. Second sentence has to include your, like, how it is that you're going to do this, what sort of methodologies, theories, philosophers that you're going to be employing to do this. Okay, what are you relying on to make this jump? Okay. The third thing, I think this is the sort of the showstopper. This is where you should start to either build toward your argument or even just outright state it. So, like, to be even more concrete about this, I'm doing this off the top of my head, so I apologize if this is messy, but let's just go with the correction thing, just the first one. Scholars in X field have often emphasized blank, period. Recently, there is an urgent need to look at blank, and this should be a parallel and obverse of that first sentence. in this talk, using theorists, philosophy, period, I will be arguing blank, period. Fourth sentence, by looking at blank in the previous sentence, we get a different, new, challenging, whatever, some describing word, sense of the field than we have otherwise thought it, period. That's your 4-sentence basic model. You don't have to do it exactly as I mean, probably everybody shouldn't, but just as a way to start to think about that, it's crucial to try to get the idea into a format that's kind of like that, and then you can make it expressive from that. But if you can do that Mad Libs version that I just sort of came up with, then that's good. A lot of mistakes people often make in abstracts is that they start way too wide of what they're eventually going to end up talking about, or it's way too big. I always use this example in class. One time as a professor, I had a student, the first sentence of their paper was something like, since the dawn of time, humankind has looked up into the stars and wondered. And I was just like, this paper is about how you think Jay-Z is an Illuminati. Like, why are we starting there? And also, like, that's just much too big. Like, why? I don't know. There's a lot about that that's much too big. So don't start too big. Even though in American schooling, that's like the upside down triangle is sort of the model that most people get for something. But to be as concrete and clear, and to start within the field and discipline that you're going to talk about, and not just like intellection broadly, like that's a very good thing. Like it's not, when you look at any academic journal, like nobody, like if you were going to look at the pages of PMLA, nobody in the first sentence is justifying that they're talking about literature. It's just like, that's just what's happening. Like, that's just what the journal is about. In the same way that, like, whatever you want to start closer to the mark that you're going to get to in the conference talk, because it's not weird that you are like distilling, like you're distilling an entire conversation about all fields to just this one point. So like starting with that, like, again, scholars in blank have often noted this, okay? And you're departing from that for these reasons. What is it that we get by seeing things in a different way? Okay, like what is additive? Why is it? And I think this is the most important thing, is why is it urgent? And not just what, and I think not just why can we do this, I would say why must we?
Right.
And I think that's sometimes I know my students, at least, they don't like, I think because of I largely think that it's a Twitter type thing, is that like the idea that like it's a lot more comfortable to say that you can see something in a certain way on Twitter than it is to say that you must, because it's like, well, what about this other thing? And it's like, you don't write these things like someone's going to bite your head off because you said we must see things in a certain way, and you forgot, to mention all kinds of other stuff. It's a very short document. Like I said, 300 to 500 words. You should try to get the most important things in like those 4 sentences and that like kind of outline that I gave, because it shows that you are clear in your thinking, and even if you don't know, because most people, what's the I don't know if this is a dirty secret about the abstract, but like academics write the talk on the plane right to the conference. That's like a common thing. Like you don't necessarily write the abstract from something you already have written. You don't have to have it written. It's more of a promise. But if you can get it clear, if it's clearly written, and you can get it in something close to that format that I described about 4 minutes ago, then it shows that like you can produce the paper, and you can produce something that is engaging, and people, regardless of what field they come from or whatever, or their academic background is, they're going to get something out of your talk.
Right. And so we've arrived at, assuming the first reality that we've arrived at is that for the graduate student, or the unaffiliated
or
Yeah,
unfamiliar.
yeah. That yeah, you may have that seminar paper you wrote. You may even have a I don't know how long the chapters are these days for the dissertation, but it's best to open up a new document
Yes.
and then go back and think about that paper and then just produce this really tight revision promissory note. And
Yes.
when you get that acceptance, and hopefully you do, at that point, I would encourage you to again to recognize that we're looking at a 20-minute talk, and nobody. It's like Samuel Johnson on Paradise Lost. Nobody wished it any longer. That generally
It's
speaking,
pretty good.
if you come in closer to 15 minutes than 20,
Yes.
nobody's going to be mad at you because it's more time for them to talk and ask questions. And we are, as to a certain extent, an egotistical bunch. So, as best you can, say to yourself, all right, I'm going to produce like a double-spaced 8-page text and I may depart a little bit from it when I if I'm casual, and give it your best shot to write it clean, write it new. You're a better, sharper thinker than you were when you wrote that paper last fall or whenever it was. And then, yeah, you can go back and go, I think I'm going to import this little bit here or that bit, or, you take your quotations over. That's fine. But really, I think it works better when you recognize the opportunity that you have to do it fresh and do it as the script for a paper that you're going to deliver, whether it's virtual or in person. You're going to deliver it. It's a different experience than the 20 or 30 page paper you're uploading on Canvas that I'm going to read. And so you should take advantage of that to produce a good document for the occasion.
Absolutely. I cannot stress enough. This is not a it's not a point that I want to like move past. Like some of the I'm not naming and shaming. I've done this to this thing that I'm about to say. So it's not if when I hear someone announce at the start of their talk that this talk comes from a longer chapter, I know that it's not going to be a very good talk, because they're two different genres. It's not that I know the ideas are going to be bad or the person's like suddenly stupid or whatever. That's not it at all. But it's just what it takes for something to be an engaging talk is very different from it takes for something to be a successful chapter, either in a book, a dissertation, or even an article. Like and so to keep doing like the brass tacks thing. You said 8 pages. I'm going to say 7 because it's 2 minutes per page. And if you've never done an academic talk before, like you will read it faster than you think because you'll be nervous. So, but you want to try to not do that. You also want to, I would highly encourage saying in a sentence what your talk is going to do at the start, like separate from the talk. Like this talk is going to discuss the political forms in the nonfiction work of Virginia Woolf, and we're going to be looking at how she saw the problems of democracy from this period of this earlier writing to this period of later one, this like interwar period or whatever. Okay, you say that 2 sentences, everybody, because it's like, and I know it's not just me. It's hard to pay total, complete attention to a talk for the full 15 minutes, like consecutively, and the idea that you're mind as an audience won't drift at some point. It's just like, I think that's impossible. Like, of course it's going to drift. And then you're going to be like, oh, I didn't listen in the last minute and I got to come back. But if you say at the start what your thing is and what it's doing, then everyone's going to come back to it. And so that's very, very important. I'm also going to say in a brass tacks way, no more than one quotation from someone else than one per page. I'm going to say no more than one, because it's hard. It's easier. Again, this is another thing that makes something different from a successful written document to a successful, oral document, is that it's if you're quoting too much, it's hard to know who's talking. Is this your idea? Is this somebody else's idea? Are we critiquing this idea? Are we endorsing this idea? Or is there a new edge to this idea? What is it that we're doing? It's hard to I know it's not just me. It's hard to do that when someone is just speaking. So that would be the thing. I think you're absolutely right to say, like, a shorter document, err on the side of a shorter document. If it's 20 minutes, then you should plan for 15. That's why I said 7, 2 minutes per page.
Right.
You give yourself an extra minute of here's a fun little tip. If you, maybe not for the first time you do a paper, but put in moments where you can speak extemporaneously about the thing, like to kind of step away from the paper like a little bit. People like that. It's not a, I don't think it's like a magic trick, but it's something that shows that you have a grip on the thing that you're talking about, that you can speak extemporaneously about the thing. It can be very hard if you're an anxious person like me, and you're nervous about the questions that you might get asked. I think this is unconsciously the driving force behind long papers, is so that there's no time for questions. If you get a panel full of long papers, there's absolutely no time left for questions and discussion after. And I think it's just because people live in fear of the death question,
Right.
which I understand. I totally understand it. But it's you want to try to leave space. I think, and I think that conferences, especially your conference, like the atmosphere is it's a lot more generous than I don't know. Sometimes you get like the ungenerous person at a major big conference like MLA. You get somebody coming in with an axe to grind about a certain topic or something like that. I think that's much less likely to happen at your conference, or even at smaller, more subfield specific kind of conferences. So. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I would say, as we get into the question of the question and answer session, that first of all, if you decide to come to the Louisville conference and or you take the plunge somewhere else, yes, there's a range of experiences that happen with conferencing and it's just part of the experience of being an academic, or a conference attendee, if this is your calling, that you may have an experience where there's one or two people in the audience and that's it, and that experience may have the cherry on top of the door opening and a person coming in, and your heart skips a beat, and they go, we need more seats next door. Can I take these chairs? Thank you. And then drag them across the hall, and you go and I mean, I've seen this. I've been the person who's taken the chairs over to the room, and I go, wow, I feel sorry for these graduate students. They happen to be up against some heavy hitters, and everybody, it's standing room only in the other room. And it happens. I've given talks to no one, and I've given talks to standing room, and and it is what it is. There's no reason to sugarcoat it, but it's not necessarily the case that the talk that you give to a few people or just the other people who are presenting is a bad experience. It can be a good experience if it's the first time you've given a paper. I've talked to graduate students last year who were really thankful, frankly, that there weren't that many people in the room. And that the questions are much more softball and much more, helpful in a low-key session than where people feel the need, to grandstand in the session that is packed in order to point out that, they're really ticked off that their work wasn't cited. And
yeah.
and
Oh man,
that's the
I've
way
gotten
it
that in
goes.
reader reports too, Matt. Like that, you can never escape that. so, yeah.
Right. So keep that in mind. And the question and answer session, it is what you're saying is true to the degree that at the Louisville conference that feedback has come back to me about aggressive questioning. It's very unusual these days, in my opinion, and much more common when, 20 or 30 years ago, back when I was talking about what the environment was like when, Fish and Jameson stood like Godzilla and King Kong in a movie, that it has to do, because there's a lot of poetry and poetics at the conference, that things will get aggressive just over declarations of taste. You know what I mean? Like, it won't be, you don't, I think your reading's weak. It will be, how can you even spend time writing about poet X? No one reads poet X anymore. And okay, well then I think they're wrong, and I think Poet X needs to be read, and I'm here to lead the charge to resurrect Poet X. And and that's the other thing is generally, and you can't always do it, and I certainly have failed in my career at times to respond to a question as a constructive question. Even if it's rather obvious that it is not, there's really nothing to be gained from contributing to a kind of feedback loop into negativity. And I really encourage, again, whether you come to the LCLC or not, there are other mentors. I haven't mentioned Eve Sedgwick, but she was a big influence. I was fortunate to study with her. And this is really an Eve Sedgwick point. Who cares what the spirit was that it was being offered? Accept it in a spirit that repositions it as constructive and positive and something that you can work with. You'll feel better for having done so.
That's awesome. That's really, really great advice. I also think on this, it doesn't feel like I don't know is a good answer to a question, but sometimes it is. Like sometimes I don't know is an earned and academic response. And I think we generally don't think that. Like if you don't have an answer, that it means you're an idiot, you're a fraud, you are an imposter. You should no one should ever listen to you. You shouldn't ever be paid to do academic work or ever at all. And that's just not how it is. I'm very open about this with my students on the podcast. I have a cognitive disability from traumatic brain injury I suffered in 2007 that just continues to affect me all the time because you never stop having a traumatic brain injury. It changes how it manifests. And one of the things is that like when I'm excessively like and so one of the things is like it manifests, I think, in a way that people who have anxiety disorders would be familiar with. Like in a high stress, high anxiety situation, I talk really fast. I can't keep track of my thoughts. Like I get very, very nervous. Like sometimes like I'll even like black out like a little bit, like, and I'm just like, I don't know what I said. Like I'm not really sure what happened. And in one of these like situations that is very regular for my profession is the academic conference, and the thing, it is really, really hard for me. It doesn't matter whether it's a generously asked question or an ungenerously. It really doesn't matter. It could be any kind of question asked after a talk. Like, I will not have a good answer to that until I'm driving on the highway like 2 weeks later, and then I'll have the perfect response. And I think, and I've yet to practice this because I had to come to this realization later that like I personally think, and I think other people should as well, like I think it's okay to say I don't know the answer to that right now, especially if it's an ungenerous question. But if you want to exchange information after, I can get back to you because I think there is something that's really worth pondering about with the way that your question related to my talk into these issues. And then if in the amount of time it took for you to say that, you get a sense of an answer. Like, my sense is that the answer would have something to do with blank and blank, but I don't have the connection perfect right now. But thank you, I appreciate the question.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good one. And that does kind of get us into right, the other aspect of conferencing, which is the networking of it, that you've figured out how to submit, you figured out how to get in, you figured out how to attend. If writing the director might help shake some money free for you.
This is a great point. Yeah, the funding is a big one, because a lot of colleges do have funding to support graduate students, but a lot of colleges don't, or it's limited, or it's a hassle. Like, I remember at University of Rhode Island, they did not like at Pomona, if you say you're going to do a thing, then the college doesn't care. You get the money for it. But at especially if you're at a state or a public university, like, you have to have done the thing before you get the money. So you get reimbursed rather than you get the money to do the thing. And that's a really tricky game. I mean, like, I as a graduate, I never made more than $19,000 as a year as a graduate student, so like putting conference stuff on a credit card is that's a dangerous game. But it's also part of this is the thing, right? Like, bigger conferences have more money to give to people who don't have it, but then you get into that bigger conference atmosphere, and it's maybe some of the more unsavory elements of conferencing that we were talking about. But yes, emailing the director to shake free money if you need it, especially if you're an unaffiliated scholar or at a college that doesn't have money to support conference activity from students.
Right. And yeah, at that point, we're talking about networking, about socializing. We're in a very different environment now about those subjects. I did a podcast with Alan Nadal, who is one of the foundational figures of your media studies, particularly American studies. Mm-hmm. Go back and listen to his podcast that I did with him about it. But he is very forthright, frankly, in the podcast that the term that they used was cruising sessions, and that there was the ethos of the time. This is a conference that's celebrating its 50th year. So in the 70s on up, it was different than it is now. And I think that we're a safe conference, and I think that we are, myself and the other people who put it on are attentive and receptive to make sure that interactions are appropriate. But I'm not sure as an older statesman now what other advice can be offered on those serious topics.
Yeah, I think this is where because you are you're receptive to the intellectual content of the conference itself. I also think that like this is one of those situations where if I don't know if you feel comfortable putting this call out that like if someone is listening to this, they go through all the the heavy intellectual work of putting together the abstract, the cover letter, they get in, they go, and they have an unsavory experience, you would probably be open to hearing from them, I imagine. Yeah.
Right. Well, I do. We use Eventbrite,
Mm-hmm.
and which is its strengths and its weaknesses. But when and so I can continually, send out missives to the people that are attending, and I have put up on the LouisvilleConference.com under the more is an incident report form.
Nice.
So if you need to use it, then I encourage you to do so, and we will follow it up. I'm happy to say that there were no incident report forms filed last year, and that I initiated it, so I can't go back beyond last year. But obviously, one wants to hear that,
Matt. But it's
so
just
so good.
Yeah, no, just to say like I don't think I'll put it this way, like I never when I was starting to go to conferences and stuff like that, like I mean, I don't know, nobody ever told me that like something bad could happen at a conference, like, so I just think like we're not, I just want to put it this way, I think we're having this conversation because, to go back to our models, like I think there's a gap in the field about like literally what are the brass tacks about like how do you even do the conference, what is it even like, what are the things that you should expect, and there are things that like you'll you will like I'm the like I will talk about this in a second, like there's a strong argument that I owe my career to a conference, and there are other people might have the same kind of story, and in that version you don't get that anything bad could happen. And so anyway, I think it's important that we're bringing those things up, because like those things do happen, but it's like it's better to have this kind of conversation now than to like have it on like the Chronicle after an incident happens. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
that's how those things happen, is that like people don't talk about it before, and if you don't talk about it before, it means that the organizers of the conference aren't aware that something bad could happen, and then when something bad happens, they act like it didn't happen, and then that's how something ends up on the front page of the Chronicle, stuff like that. So I think
Right.
like I wouldn't want anyone getting to be like, man, this sounds like really scary. It's like you know what, it can be like it can be like for like in regular ways or worse, but like it's important to I think to acknowledge that, and also but then also to say that like it can also be the time of your life. But I mean you don't want to give the sunshine. I just think the sunshine version of anything in academia is just so false, so like
Right.
it's important to go along this path, I think.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. So, and then hopefully you get back, and right. And if you need to bug me for additional documentation to get your money, you won't be the only one. And I'm fortunate that I have really good staff that do the record keeping on all of that, and we're here to help you make sure that you get it done. And we do a full refund, no questions asked policy. So there is a early bird, and then a slight bump if you miss that deadline. But in any case, if it's I got snowed in or whatever it is,
right.
we will refund your money.
That's awesome. It maybe seems too idealistic for people to mention, but I do think that that is the best thing about an academic conference, is you're meeting somebody at the level of the things that they think, and that is like that can be a that's in this line of work, I think that's it's a different way to meet people, and it's a way that for like you shouldn't do it for that, because then it gets up being really capitalistic and like, you have to do it because then you might get a job opportunity like that's too much. But it is something that could happen.
Right.
It's like you meet somebody and then there's a job at that institution, and even if you didn't talk to that person in the intervening time, which I didn't talk to Jennifer in the intervening time, they will remember you, and that is so important. Like, you've already made a first impression. I will put it that way.
Right. Well, and I think we've kind of covered all our bases. And my closing thought then on it is, I guess, to balance your comment right there, and to perhaps quilt this conversation that we're having into the conversation that you and Todd have been having on why theory, where you've been talking about quilting point and its utility in Lacanian psychoanalysis and elsewhere. That a key, maybe my favorite concept from Lacan, foundational concept, it isn't quilting point. It's really the self supposed to know, and understanding that, for Lacan anyway, the whole point of the idea that you have an analyst and you have an analysand, so you have somebody going into the therapy, and then you've got the therapist, and that the therapist is functioning in a relay for this person utilizing the talking cure as not the self that knows, but the self that is supposed to know, where we understand really that the analyst doesn't know. The analyst isn't here to give you the right answer. You're going to pull a better answer out of yourself if the therapy is doing what we kind of hope it will do. And that a conference, I'm not reading your work, and then when I'll read it over first and make sure that you haven't that you've left your name on it, or that you've dropped your institution on it, or that there's a footnote thanking your instructor at the institution on it, or whatever it is. And then I'll figure out who among my committee I think is an appropriate reader for it, and I will strike that stuff off, and then it will get read. And then I'll come back and look at it, and we'll take and it'll be a yes or a no or a maybe. And the maybes usually just get taken in to fill out the panels, frankly. And that's the way that works. But I don't read, and I would encourage your audience not to think this way about theory. I don't read theory and say to myself, but that's obviously a wrong understanding of Lacanian psychoanalysis. Lacan would disagree with that, and throw that person out onto the street and stop their session immediately. The point isn't, are you using the theory concepts correctly so that Fish would agree with your definition of reader response theory, or Jameson would agree with your definition of Marxist aesthetics. The question is, are you using it the way that you want to use it in order to propel us on to, in that hermeneutics of suspicion conversation that we are having, to get to something new to think about that has a point to it? And if you are using theory in the service of unearthing, to use that metaphor, a new sort of plateau from which we can see some things that we weren't seeing, then I can't wait for you to come to my conference and tell us about that. And that's the only test is, are you putting it in the service of something useful? Not, is that the right application of the word deconstruction or not? Right. So keep that in mind.
That's a beautiful note to end on. I think that's really great, Matthew. And I hope everybody takes the sincerity of the message to heart. That nobody's reading to be a pedant. People are reading to see, is this a person that has ideas and they want to propel a conversation forward? That's the kind of person we want at the conference. I think that's great.
My thanks again to Ryan Engley for his contribution to this LCLC episode. If you benefited from it or simply enjoyed listening to it, please hit like and subscribe. And as always, please consider joining us for an upcoming LCLC conference. Consult the LouisvilleConference.com for details or reach out directly to me, Matthew Biberman, for information.